second. Well, good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all the members from Borivali Central CP Study Circle to the 46th meeting of the year 2021. Today, we are going to speak on very different topics, which is sustainability reporting, the way forward, and CSR. Well, what is sustainability reporting is there everywhere around us. If you speak about the current festive season being going on, it is about Ganpati, where we all are talking about our ecosystem. Sustainability reporting is typically a reporting which is required to be done by the companies for their environmental and social factors or social measures that they are carrying on. And CSR, I think everybody is well aware of. This brief introduction, I would like to hand over the reins to our chairperson today, CA Hiren Mehta, our past convener of the study circle. Over to you, Hiren bhai. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pradeep bhai. Good morning, everyone. Presently, Pradeep has already given you the background of the topic, and we have with us very talented Mitika Bajpai, who is taking over these sessions, and she is from the Reliance Group. I request my colleague Bijal Doshi to formally introduce her. You are on mute, Bijal.
Sir, ICI motto needs to be played, sir.
Okay. Sorry, before that, we have to rise for the institute motto.
सुप्तेषु जागृति य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Thank you, sir. Mitika Bajpai ma'am is strategic passionate about solving real-world problems, who truly believes that empathy and system thinking can help make a world a better place for our children and grandchildren. She is bachelor in electronic engineer from Mumbai University, and she has done her master in sustainability management from Columbia University, New York. She has been working with Reliance as a corporate sustainability manager and a strategist for over four years now. At present at Reliance, she is working on environmental and social performance of the organization. Over last decade, she has also worked in Asia, Africa, and North America across non-profit consultings, as well as engineering, digital services, and energy sectors. With this brief introduction, I would like to present Momento. Welcome to BCIC, ma'am. I request you to start the session.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome and for the introductions. I think it's amazing that there is a forum to be able to study together. I wish this was a forum that was present for all professionals. Having said that, sustainability is a new buzzword. So what I'll do today is I'm going to begin. I hope you can see my screen now, yeah? Okay.
Yes, ma'am, we can see the screen.
Wonderful, thank you. So what we'll be discussing today is the way forward in terms of what is sustainability and how that has changed over the years. But what I'll do before that is just walk you through what I intend on talking about here, right? So we'll walk through the definition of sustainability and ESG. ESG is something that Pradeep touched upon earlier as well, which is environmental, social, and governance performance of any organization, company, or not-for-profit or government. Then we'll touch upon what sustainability reporting is, and maybe I'll just broadly go over a few frameworks that help you understand what reporting is, as to help you understand what is it that you need to report on in the field of sustainability. And then, of course, I'll touch upon why is it important for financial professionals, as to whether it's just a buzzword to be mindful of, or whether there's some action steps that can be taken by finance professionals as well. Before we begin, and here is where I need the support of our organizers, our wonderful organizers, I'm going to ask the audience a question. And what I request the audience to do is, in the chat box, please reply with what answers you feel is correct. There is no right or wrong answer, so I want as much participation as possible. And the question is, what do you think is the right terminology? So you have a lot of words on the screen. I've given you a few hints as to whether you feel any of these are relevant. If you feel none of these are relevant, you can also say that. You have the word sustainability, sustainable development, green economy, environmentalism, environment, social and governance, environment, health and safety, corporate social investment, corporate social responsibility, regenerative economy, circularity, or any other you choose to. So I'd encourage the audience to, oh, I see the chat already, wonderful. Okay, somebody says all, okay. And any other responses? We have 44 participants. I'm sure we'll get more than one response from this group, right? Okay, I'm displaying the images again. It is sustainability, sustainable development, environmentalism, environment, health and safety, corporate social investment. What do you think is the right word? What do you think people use currently, or what have you heard of before? ESH. Thank you, Pradeep sir. You've heard of ESH before, yes? Any other words you've heard of before? Has anyone heard of environmentalism or the Chipko movement? Okay, not a very interactive group. Anyway, we should proceed. So the thing is, whoever mentioned all at first was very surprisingly correct. Yeah? I don't know how. It seems like everyone either already knows the answer or has done this before. So yes, all of them lead to the exact same definition. They're just different words for the exact same intent, right? And what happens is, over the years, the same word just changes a little bit to try and incorporate a little more or try and send a different message across. So say, for example, when we talk about CSR, right, corporate social responsibility, right before the CSR 2013 Act was passed, people were also debating between using the words corporate social investment, saying that, okay, we're not just responsible, we're not just doing this because we are good citizens of the company or of the world or of the country, but we are doing this also because it makes sense for the company to do it. It makes sense for the company to engage with communities, which is why it should be considered as corporate social investment. But again, the intent was exactly the same. The words were slightly different to try and help more people understand the meaning here. So let me get to the actual definition of sustainability, right? So the one that is most accepted globally is the one that was defined by the Brundtland Commission, which is the World Commission on Environment and Development's 1980s definition. The definition states, sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. My mentor used to say this in simpler words. It's, what can you and I do today that the world of tomorrow needs? Right? And why this is globally accepted is that because it touches upon two major aspects, and that's what you see on the left side of the screen. It touches upon the concept of needs, right? So needs talks about not just the needs of the elite, but the needs of the poor that have to be acknowledged in doing so. So today what we need to do is acknowledge the needs of the poor such that the future generations can also meet their needs, right? And the other concept that it introduced, which was very fascinating, is the idea of limitations. It talked about how we don't live in a limitless world. We live in a world with resource crunch. We live in a world with limitations on resources, right? So any limitation that is imposed by the state of technology and social organizations on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. Are we extracting more than the environment can regenerate for itself? Is a question that we always ask before we extract from the environment, of course. What was also interesting in this commission's report was that it talked about 6 interconnected focus areas, right? So when we talk about environment, social, and governance, or when we talk about sustainability or sustainable development, it is not just environmental parameters that we need to think of. And that's what the commission's report made us think of way back in 1980s, right? You see the 6 interconnected areas on the right side of the screen, which is population and affluence as a resource office, food security, species and ecosystems, energy, the choices of environment and development. In the sense, all of us definitely need energy as a resource, but how are we doing that while existing as a part of a nature and as a part of the environment as opposed to away from it, right? And the other 2 aspects, which are also, again, social and environmental and governance oriented, is how is industry going to produce more with less resources, right? And the urban challenge, in the sense that poverty and inequality are considered as not just an urban challenge, but now also a rural challenge. But how are we going to provide the same amenities, same basic needs to all in an urban area or in an urban setting or a developed setting in this context, right? So it shows the interconnectedness between all of these 6. So here you are, you've got the definition of sustainability right in front of you. What can you do today without compromising the future generations' needs, right? Let me get to what this means today, right? And this is just a screenshot of last week's Times of India news. And I just searched for the word climate in Times of India, and this is all that showed up, right? In the last 1 week alone, there were 10 articles, of which 5 I have shortlisted here to show up on the screen. And on the 2nd of September, another interesting article was also shared, which I thought, considering all of us live in Mumbai, we should all be mindful of. The article on the 2nd of September reads, to stop Mumbai from sinking, government to set up CM-led panel on climate change. Imagine that. The CM is directly getting involved in understanding what is it that they can do to save Mumbai from the climate change that's currently happening, right? Some of us must have been in Mumbai during the 2005 floods, right? We've seen the extreme impacts it had. Every year, a certain amount of people are displaced within Mumbai because of the flooding that happens every year. Now imagine, and this is all currently with the IPCC report stating that IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a global body. It talks about research regarding climate change, and they publish a report on a frequent basis. Their last report was released in August, and it talked about the catastrophic impact that climate change already has on the environment, already has on our sort of well-being, on our way of living. Something as simple as the US floods that had happened, right? There have been a lot of jokes about it, and I think some senior leaders have also tweeted this, saying that, internationals would ask me when I'm in Mumbai, what am I doing about the floods? Now everyone the world over is asking New Yorkers, what are you doing about the floods? Are you okay? So what would be a common weather occurrence in the tropical region has now moved beyond the tropics as well. So climate has clearly already changed. Having said that, a lot of other wildfires that happen, droughts that are happening, a major chunk of sort of impact on agriculture that is happening as a consequence of climate change. And what that has resulted to is a lot of other issues, right? So, till before the pandemic, all of us were talking about how bad Delhi air is, Right? One of the major reasons most of us wanted to live in Mumbai was also because the Delhi air is too polluted to bring up any children. Forget yourself actually living through it. But that is a direct consequence of the kind of pollution we are creating for our basic necessities. And it is coming from an industry like agriculture in that region. All of us need food to survive. So are you going to choose between food survival versus clean air? Nobody should have to do that, right? So what can we do holistically as an industry, holistically as a government, holistically as a country to try and make sure all of our needs are met with some form of equality? I know nothing is ever really equal, but with some form of equality that we can get to. I see a question in the... You're right, Karan, so on the chat, people need to change habits and come out of their comfort zone. Absolutely. It's no... what has happened in the past cannot solve the future challenges, right? The West had a certain form of development and they based it purely off of consumerism, right? More means great. We traditionally also come from a background in India wherein we know more is not great, right? If you talk to our grandparents, you talk to our great-grandparents, they will still tell you rainwater harvesting is a must. How can you let water as a valuable resource go to waste? Some people even worship water to that extent. All of us still worship Ganga River, right? And we still are very happy to pollute it, very happy to dump all of our sewage waste into it, very happy to dump all of our industrial waste into it as well, right? Who would have thought that would be a possibility? But yes, we know for a fact that development methodology does not work for us. But we are trying to do something that does not exist in the first place, right? So if we want to change our habits, we want to change our way of being, what are we deriving inspiration from to do so? That is sort of the essence of sustainability. From a business standpoint, what that means is we need to be mindful of the resources that we take or derive from the environment, right? One, we need to start measuring that resource. Two, we also need to start asking questions around whether or not this is the best resource for us available right now, or there are other resources as well that we can access, right? So some of you may have attended or may have read in the newspaper about the hydrogen forum that was launched by a government on the 3rd of September. From Reliance, our chairman also spoke about his vision of making hydrogen, bring down the cost of hydrogen to $1 per kg, so 1 kg per 1 kg within 1 decade. So the 111 goal is what he called it, right? So now we're completely moving away from energy as we know it. We are moving away from coal and fossil fuels and gas to a completely new form of energy. And all the intent of our government and a major chunk of our industries is to do so within less than a decade. Imagine that we're already changing the habits that we have inculcated over the last 70 plus years of independence, right? So yes, we from an environment standpoint, you understand what sustainability means. But on a social standpoint, if on the right you see some of the news articles that have talked about, right? Climate change pushes New Zealand to have the warmest record. Telangana falls short in efforts to combat climate change. Low-income wards in Mumbai lack green spaces. And this is something the climate study has found. Imagine the interlinkages they would have had to go through to be able to understand this impact, right? What this essentially is stating that inequality is getting aggravated because of climate change. They don't have access to green spaces, which means you're literally looking into each other's homes when you open the window or you draw the curtains. And that's the sort of environment or that's the sort of urban setup we are very comfortable with having in Mumbai, it seems, right? Because we don't see the implications of what environment or green spaces have within our social fabric. Right? And this particular study is very close to my heart. My master's thesis was also on something very similar, which I'll be happy to chat about offline as well. Okay, so we understand what environment means, what social fabric is. So it is everything right from our CSR initiatives that most people are aware of, or thanks to the 2013 Act, more and more people are now aware of. But it is also something as simple as how do we treat our employees, right? How are we treating our contract workers? How are we treating our laborers? Swiggy and Zomato and a bunch of these delivery apps have come under bad publicity, if I can call it that, because they are not treating, they're expecting their delivery boys to go ahead and deliver stuff even with extreme weather conditions outside, right? So that sort of inconsideration is something that they've been sort of put down for. But at the same time, you also need to acknowledge that we're in the middle of a pandemic and we do require delivery to happen. So what is the balance in such a case? How are we meeting social needs of the delivery personnel and the social needs of the customers and stakeholders at the same time? And how are we doing this in a just and equal manner? Right? These are questions that businesses are now being forced to ask because people have become more conscious of it and a lot of other reasons which we'll also get to. Let's move to the next bit. So what I want to ask you is another question, and hopefully this time I'll get a few more responses. I want to know, so financial data is very easy to talk about, right? You know exactly what you're measuring when it comes to money. It's all numerical. It is all, if you get a definition in the textbook, you'd know how to apply it in the real world, right? What I want to ask you is, what do you think is a non-financial data point? What would you measure as a non-financial data point? And I'd encourage some audience participation in the chat box. If you could just what's on your mind, what do you think is a non-financial data point? What would you measure? How would you measure pollution, for example? Or how would you measure the water that is needed for processes? Workforce satisfaction, absolutely. That's a very good point. Anyone else? What do you see on a daily basis that you can measure? That's not money oriented. Happiness index, yes, absolutely. That's wonderful. We have a lot of social metrics coming. Impact on environment by pollution index, absolutely. Environment parameters also coming through. This is great. Okay. So let me tell you a few of what is actually a non-financial data point, right? When we talk about sustainability within a business standpoint, it is not because it's the right thing to do. It is not just because it is the right thing to do. It is not because optimum use of resources. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Karanji. So when we talk about sustainability in a business context, right, we are asked to include parameters such as our air emissions, how much water are we withdrawing, how much water are we recycling, how much water are we giving back to the system, whether it's through desalination or water withdrawal or rainwater harvesting. Very specific metrics. You're actually expected to disclose the numbers for the same. Similarly for waste, right? How much waste are we generating? How much waste are we recycling? For raw material, what quantities of raw material are we importing or collecting or buying to be able to make the products or offer the services that we choose to offer, right? These are some of the environmental metrics that I just mentioned. You also have a lot of social metrics, right? So every number that our human resources team measures would be classified as a non-financial data point, right? Similarly for learning and development. So the learning hours all of us choose to put in is also a huge social strength because that's the amount of knowledge we are sharing within our organizations, also through these study circles like this one. But also questions about ethics, right? So what are we doing for grievance redressal? If there is any case of child labor that we are aware of in, say, a system, if we see a chotu on the side of the street serving us chai, do we actually go back and find out who is hiring that child to be able to serve us the chai? Are we complaining as individuals as well? Are we talking about how this child should also be educated as opposed to just be on the streets or just be serving chai or be involved in child labor in such sort of fashion? And more so in industries like the fashion industry, this is something that we discussed, that was in the news till about 10 years ago, primarily in Bangladesh and similar organizations. And also the firecracker industry, I'm sure you've read about, has received a lot of flack on child labor, right? wherein because they have small hands as children, they can sew things better, they can make the firecrackers better by using their small hands to fill toxic chemicals within the firecracker thing. But there are certain industries that felt it was normal to hire children for something like this just because they need the money for it, right? What they need is the right amount of education, the freedom to grow such that when they are adults, they can make the decision to be wherever they want to be, right? It's not our prerogative as economists or part of the country's economy to force children to behave like that, right? So if you do come across child labor happening, who are you going to complain to? How are you going to reach the company? Say, for example, somebody who's serving chai in their outlet stores. How are you going to raise the complaint saying that, okay, you cannot hire a child. This person that is serving me is definitely under 18. Maybe, there are false documents available, which is why the company does not know about it. But they should definitely also have a communication channel that is open and record the number of complaints that come to them and how they have resolved it. That all of that falls under the umbrella of ethics here as well, right? Health and safety, I think that has become more sort of a prevalent discussion thanks to the pandemic for all of us. What are companies doing to promote employee well-being? What are they doing to ensure good health for our citizens? People, what are they doing in terms of vaccinations right now? How are they providing the care that they need? Whether it's just in terms of time off, paid time off, or whether you're actually providing the healthcare services that the company, the employee or their family members need as well, right? Similarly for safety, if you're in operational safety, you need to track things like lost time injury frequency rate. What is the incident that occurred? How are you going to learn from that incident that occurred in, say, a manufacturing facility? And how are you going to make sure that incident does not happen again? How are you promoting safety? What learning initiatives are you taking? What numbers are you tracking? How are you engaging with not just your employees, but also your extended workforce, right? And all of this is again linked to finances, right? Which is also interesting. So even though I've mentioned only non-financial data points, they are also always linked to financial metrics. So say, for example, when we're talking about GHG emissions, how we measure GHG emissions is by tracking what our electricity bill is going to be, right? So over the months, we track what our electricity bill is because our electricity bill tells us how much energy we have consumed or how much electricity we have consumed, basis which we calculate our GHG emissions or our scope 2 emissions, as it is known by sustainability analysts. Similarly, for health and safety, you're expected to report on your health and safety expenditure, right? Annually, what are you spending to promote health and safety within companies or ensure health and safety within companies? Right? Who would have thought that what is otherwise a very abstract concept is actually also very directly linked to something quantitative and something that can be measured through money as well, right? Then of course you also have customers and suppliers that are part of your non-financial data points. So how many customer complaints have you received? How much have you spent on resolving your customer complaints? How many if you're talking about suppliers, there are lots of suppliers that reach out to their supply chain to ask questions about the supply chain sustainability measures. So ACC is one such company that is known in India to be doing so, right? ACC sends a survey, an annual survey to all of their suppliers, every single one of the suppliers, even though it's a cement company. Imagine their large supply chain. Every single one of the suppliers gets a survey every year that they have to fill out on ESG parameters. So environment, social, and governance parameters, and then report the same with ACC, report the same to ACC in complete confidentiality. ACC simply wants to encourage the supply chain to be able to transform with them, for example. And then, of course, risk and mitigation and board performance is the other governance aspect of it. So when we talk about board performance, there are lots of questions about how is the board involved in measuring or in ensuring that the company is doing the right thing beyond finances to all stakeholders involved, right? So it could be something as simple as how is the board measuring CSR spend, right? How is the board ensuring that the CSR money is going to the right intent, going to reaching the benefactors that it is intended to reach? Right? Something as simple as that, as to whether or not the board is involved in something like that, is something that investors also ask today. right? Risk and mitigation. So if you're living in Mumbai, you know for a fact that you will be facing floods every year. How are you mitigating that risk on an annual basis if your office is also in Mumbai? Are you okay with losing 7 working days every year on flood related issues? Or are you going to moving forward adapt to work from home situations in such situations wherein you have people have the freedom to also be present virtually and still contribute to the economy? So what are the risks that arise with changing climate or any other sort of extreme events that happen around us, and how are we going to move forward? Please post questions. Yes, of course. If you have any questions, you can type in the Q&A box. I'll try and answer them. While if not, then we can have them in the end as well. So, what are the drivers of sustainability reporting today? So now you understand the definition of sustainability. You understand what are the things you're supposed to report on, or what is it that could classify as a non-financial data point. But why has sustainability reporting become popular today? So Reliance ourselves, we've been reporting since 2004, right, on sustainability metrics. But people have started looking at our sustainability reports with excitement and are asking us about it only over the last 2-3 years. So what is it that has changed over the last 2-3 years that is making it such a buzzword, if I can call it that, right? So to answer that question, there are 3 major points that will help us understand that question better. Number one, the sustainability reporting landscape has changed a lot over the years. It has evolved. When we started off in the 1980s, sustainability reporting was still restricted to qualitative measures, so more abstract measures. So people will be very happy with simply knowing that the chairman of the company or the managing director of the company is a dedicated person and he is responsible for the community and they want to do their best. So they would be happy with words said by with sort of intent simply shared by such leaders of the organization, right? Now what that has evolved to is asking, okay, I understand your intent is great, but you are still withdrawing my water in the area and I don't have access to water because you are using it for industry reasons. Instead of me having access to that fresh drinking water for, survival reasons. So tell me how much are you withdrawing? Tell me how much of it is within compliance? Tell me how much of it is not within compliance? How many fines have you paid around the water withdrawal? And accordingly, let me decide whether I want to buy your products as a consumer. Right? So the entire supply chain is changing to ask more quantitative sustainability data points. And that has also resulted in reporting frameworks requirements. Right? What has changed is when it was okay to just have qualitative reporting, now it is mandatory almost to have quantitative reporting parameters. So people are expected, like in the water example, people are expected to report on, okay, this is my fresh water withdrawal, or this is my water recycling capability, or this is what the government has allowed me to extract water from in this region. And these are the permissions that are available, and I am in complete compliance with all of this, right? And all of this is expected as a part of our reporting frameworks, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on some of our reporting frameworks in the next few slides. So yes, we've seen the reporting journey has evolved and our metrics have evolved. It's not just about qualitative data points anymore. You need to have quantitative data points. You need to have numbers associated with these abstract concepts, right? The second thing that has happened, which is the important bit, the audience of sustainability reporting, or the audience that is interested in sustainability, has changed from just being activists and environmentalists or analysts or media that is looking for bad news in general, to now having shareholders, investors, suppliers, customers, business partners, regulators, and governments asking you the exact same questions, right? So you have investors that are asking companies, what is the CSR expense? How much are you paying your employees? Whether or not it is above minimum wage. Most of us probably don't even know that even a city like Mumbai has a minimum wage, which is mandated by the government, right? It's about 9,000 rupees per month, approximately. But I know for a fact a lot of us have taken interns in our initial years, or at least I know I was hired way back when as an intern not meeting minimum wage criteria, right? Because it was not something people were even aware of. Now governments are asking you, how are you an industry if you can't meet minimum wage criteria? This is all again for listed entities, right? SMEs, when they start off, startups is a whole other ball game. It's a whole other sort of ESG space that is still upcoming. MSMEs are a whole other sort of whole set of other questions that need to be asked instead, right? So the investors are asking such questions. I've already given you the suppliers example of ACC, but another example that I'd like to give you is that of customers. So with the generation changing, every generation has some sort of quirk, right? You'll have, I remember from my grandparents' generation, they were very mindful of water being wasted, right? I would always be told, and I'm sure a lot of us have always been told to keep the tap off, right? We also had tankers way back when to actually save the water because we didn't get access to running water even in cities like Mumbai till before the 1970s, right? It was not an easy resource to get access to, right? So they had that, and now the upcoming generations, or rather the sort of the next generation, the millennials, the Gen Z, the Gen X, everything after the Gen X actually talks about greening our supply chain, right? How am I going to, where will I recycle the plastic that I'm buying the food in? Where is my clothing coming from? Is it coming from cotton suppliers? Is it a fast fashion thing? Is it a slow fashion thing? If I'm buying a piece of clothing, is it going to last me 10 years or is it going to last me the next 10 days? Right? With one wearing, would it tear, or is it meant to last? I think there's a question asking whether the reporting are only restricted to companies and not other forms of organization. This should be extended to other organizations if it's not. You're right. It is actually expected of governments also to report it. So our government reports on INDCs, right, which are national development targets that are set. They also report on sustainable development goals, right? Globally, there are multiple websites that we are expected as a nation to disclose all of this data. And mind you, all of this is quantitative data again, right? Our renewable energy target is something we are on track with, right? So the 100 gigawatt plant that we've already set up or have commissioned or sort of set aside the investments for is something that is leading up to our national goals that have been set and that have been globally committed to. So governments are also doing it. There are lots of consulting firms that also talk about it, right? Even a company like Cipla doesn't really have a manufacturing facility, right? Even they disclose things on what are their GHG emissions, even though they're just using it to extract electricity. Not even getting to listed entities, other listed entities, it's anyway sort of mandatory, and some of it will be mandatory from 2022. But for the non-listed entities, even NGOs are expected to report it, right? So if you actually log into, say, Give India as a platform, they'll ask you to not just share information about what the project is, they'll also give you a monthly or a yearly update as to where your money has actually gone. The moment you have any number associated with it, be it monetary or non-monetary, you have a way of tracking it, right? So it's not, fortunately enough, our sustainability landscape has grown over the decade to actually incorporate more than just businesses when it comes to sustainability. So investors ask the same questions to NGOs. Global investors like World Bank and similar entities also ask the same questions to our company, our government heads, right? Our customers and we as citizens also ask our companies and governments for the same questions, right? But what has also changed is in the sustainability reporting landscape is regulators and governments are asking companies these questions too. And what I mean by that is there is a new reporting guideline that has been introduced by SEBI and MCA, or again, financial entities that have, of course, represented the government in this context, to introduce the BRSR. What BRSR stands for is Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting, which is going to be made mandatory from 2022 and is voluntary for the year 2021, right? Which means within the next less than a year and a half now, the top 100 listed entities and then gradually the top 500 listed entities and then 1,000 listed entities would be expected to report on responsibility and sustainability. So not just their CSR investments, but their sustainability investments as well. So this includes questions like GHG emissions. Even if your emissions, even if you don't have a factory, you're expected to report on your emissions, right? Even if you're offering a service as a consulting firm, you are still expected to report on your emissions, right? And the government is directly asking for this. And I'll get to elaborating on the BRSR eventually. The other thing that has also happened in an Indian context is the integrated reporting concept was introduced and then also made, was suggested to be mandatory from 2018, right? So you have a lot of entities that are looking at reporting beyond financial reporting, right? And since that concept was introduced, the IR naturally talks a little bit more about qualitative parameters, and again, I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. But that has also gradually resulted to natural improvement that happens in reporting. I think there's a hand raised. Can we have the questions in the end? Is that okay, Sanjay sir?
Yes, I think we have to take it later on.
Yes.
So person can put their questions on the question answer box.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's 10:42. What I'll do is I'll quickly walk you through 3 of these reporting frameworks, such that we at least have 5 minutes in the end for you to ask me the questions that you have in mind. Remember in the earlier slide when I talked about evolution of sustainability frameworks, this is just a list of a handful of sustainability frameworks that are currently out there. On the left, you see some of the sustainability frameworks. The ones that I've shortlisted here are global. There are many, 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 many more national frameworks that are also applicable. On the right side, what you see is ESG rating agencies. So a lot of our companies are anyway listed on MSCI and Bloomberg, right? MSCI and Bloomberg and all of these similar organizations, Thomson Reuters, Sustainalytics, Truecost, RobecoSAM, which is Dow Jones, they also give you financial ranking for the company and non-financial ranking for the company, right? So it's the industry is not just rated anymore on their financial performance by all of these global leading organizations, right? And I've just shortlisted a handful of the big names that that exist in the industry. But even MSCI India is asking you questions about your ESG performance instead of just what your profit margins are, right? When we have analyst meets or quarterly analyst meets for some companies, the questions that are being asked are about supply chain sustainability and not just about company sustainability. Imagine that level of involvement from the financial domain coming not just from investors, but also rating agencies that are already evaluating the company on the ESG performance, right? So when every year when a company reports on their financial performance, they are now just expected to also report on their non-financial performance. We'll touch upon 3 of these, GRI, IR, and BRSR. The reason I just want to briefly walk you through Global Reporting Initiative or GRI. For anyone who's actually interested in learning more, this is the most comprehensive sustainability reporting parameter, right? So it is something that was established in 1997 and it has changed over the years. I've just talked about how it has changed since 2016 and a little graphic on the right. But what the framework does is it provides clear guidelines for communicating the impacts of business on key sustainability issues such as climate change, human rights, or corruption even, right? Like over 100 countries, a little over 10,000 people have 10,000 entities have reported on GRI. These include not just businesses, but also governments, not-for-profit organizations, non-governmental organizations, and similar sort of registered organizations. But what on the right, why I think GRI is important or an easy thing to look at it is gives you, as a reporting framework, it gives you everything that you need to measure internally, right? Or something that you need to keep a track of internally that is beyond financial data points. So in the GRI standards, if you see the little graphic on the right, it is GRI 102 general disclosures, which asks you to understand your strategy, the organizational profile, the ethics and integrity practices followed, the reporting practices followed, the stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement process that is followed, and how the organization is governed, right? All the way from the top to the bottom. So board to the operational managers or operational team. The entire thing has to be considered, and all of this is part of your general disclosures within the framework. So it helps you ask the right questions internally when you want to start reporting. And the other bit, which is GRI 103, talks about the management approach. Okay, so now that you understand as a company, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. These are the major threats. If my office is in Mumbai, in say, right by Nariman Point, with the changing climate, is it possible that 2 years down the line, I might need to invest in infrastructure to raise my building's ground floor? Or will my building ground floor always be flooded every season and I have to deal with it, right? So what are the consequences of it? If this is a risk, what is my management approach to be able to mitigate that risk or adapt to that risk? What GRI also does, it gives you topic-specific disclosures on economic, environmental, and social parameters, right? So if you actually, if any of you are interested, the GRI standards link I've also shared in the slide deck here. What it does is, for each of these three, which is the GRI 200 series, 300 series, 400 series, it tells you the specific disclosure that is required for economic, environmental, and social performance. One example that I've taken on the screen on the right is that of reduction of energy consumption. So what the framework tells you, it gives you the name of the disclosure, the description of the disclosure. For example, in reduction of energy consumption, it talks about the direct result of conservation and efficiency initiatives in joules, right? It gives you the measure of unit as well, or similar multiples. So it gives you exactly what the reporting requirement is. It also talks about, if you go down to the bottom, there's a section called guidance, right? It gives you examples of what would be classified as a reduction in energy consumption activity. So say, for example, here on the bottom right, you see reduction initiatives can include process redesign, changes in behavior, operational changes, conservation of retrofitting of equipment, right? All of this is also associated with a cost. So when you actually audit your non-financial data, which is also another sort of work domain that you can consider for the future if you're good at auditing as well. When you actually get down to auditing this data, you check the money spent on these conservation initiatives. You check the process that was redesigned and how it was sort of, what is the new process that we're looking at. So say, for example, in energy, if it is something as simple as replacing your office lights with LED lights, right? You're obviously saving money in doing so, but there was an upfront capital cost in being able to do so, right? So you always have financial data points that are backing this data. If you're retrofitting an equipment, you have the money that is invested in that equipment and the money that is invested in disposing of the old equipment, right? So you're managing both the new equipment and the waste that you've created. All of it is tracked through some form of monetary bills in this context. So GRI sort of essentially helps you understand how best to report, right? It gives you specific disclosure points in doing so. And of course, on the right, on the left, you'll also see the principles that GRI talks about. So it talks about how can you enhance your reporting in a qualitative way as well. So how you do so is by making sure all stakeholders are included or considered in preparing your report. You only disclose on material topics that are important for the company in this topic, and materiality is a whole other definition within GRI, but essentially it means as a company, if I don't use water in my processes, water is not a material topic. Let's say, for example, I'm in a service sector, I will probably not be using water in anything other than, say, the toilets that are present in the office building, right? In that case, water is not a material issue for me. But maybe for the service sector, customer engagement is a more important issue, right? How I deal with my customers as a consultant, or how I deal with the other companies that I'm engaging with as a consultant is a more material issue for me, right? So GRI lets you define what is important for you as an organization. It also talks about some of the other qualitative measures, which is accuracy, balance, clarity, comparability, reliability, and timeliness. So it's essentially asking you to report in a timely manner, do it regularly, or on a defined time basis. Moving on to integrated reporting. Integrated reporting has been around so SEBI made it not mandatory but recommended in 2017 in Feb for the 500 listed entities. Whoever who was expected to also disclose on BRR, which is Business Responsibility Report, right? Now, integrated reporting essentially provides you with a framework to incorporate all non-financial data points. So the principles you see is very similar to GRI's principles. They also talk about content elements, which is again very similar to what GRI talked about. So you have what's new and what's unique with IR is the business model, which I'll elaborate on in a little bit. But you have risks and opportunities, strategy, performance in terms of quantitative performance and qualitative performance, your future outlook and basis of preparation or the scope of reporting in this context. And the unique element for the IR framework is the 6 capital framework. It talks about every company having 6 major capitals, which also includes financial capital, but also talks about natural capital or the environmental parameters, social and relationship capital or our supply chain, so customers included and communities and governments and our supply chain entirely. Then intellectual capital, so what's the knowledge in terms of tangibles and intangibles, in terms of patents, copyright, software, licenses, and any other sort of knowledge that your company needs to perform better. Human capital, which is considered our people strength, so our HR, ethics practices, and the likes of that, and manufactured capital, which is all of our physical assets that help us perform better. Right? So the IR framework gives you the freedom to talk about all of these 6 capitals in your own narrative. I'll touch upon the business model and I'll pick up the Reliance business model in this context. IR also offers you a platform to talk about how you integrated the sort of sustainability thinking all the way down to your operations. Right? So within these 6 capital structures, what is it that you're putting into your business as an input such that you get the desired output and outcomes? Input and output are quantitative. Outcomes is the larger sort of goal that the company wants to achieve. So this is an example of the Reliance framework. Of course, you can read more about it in our integrated annual report. I'll now quickly touch upon what the future of IR and GRI are, right? So the IR is now merging with SASB, which is Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. What that means is currently IR was qualitative, but SASB is purely quantitative. Now that IR and SASB are merging, in the next few years, it's very likely for us to see that the IR framework will also have mandatory quantitative reporting criteria. Right? Similarly for GRI is also launching their universal standards next month. So we'll see a little bit of change in the GRI reporting as well. Just something to be mindful of because they ask you questions that you know your analysts and your stakeholders in the future will be asking. Let's get to BRSR, right? Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. Now, BRSR is basically an evolution of BRR, Business Responsibility Report. It was introduced by MCA and SEBI earlier this year, and it will be mandatory from 2022. It talks about 9 principles, which is National Voluntary Guidelines, broadly covering 9 principles. And you see a little bit of the history right here. It started way back in 2011 and how it has evolved to come to 2020 and is now going to be made mandatory. This is again a statutory compliance requirement. What will happen is you have to fill out these details on the MCA 21 portal. Over time, using the data that you filled out, they intend to also produce a BR, Business Responsibility Sustainability Index, right? So BRS Index, based on the data that we have publicly shared, right? Broadly touching upon the 9 principles, and again, we don't need to get into details, just letting you know that it incorporates everything like from ethics and accountability to human rights, to how we respect and protect our environment, to inclusive growth, the policies around it, the well-being of employees, safe and sustainable goods and services. Some of the questions that they're asking in BRSR in terms of environment is what are your GHG emissions defined as scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. They are in this sort of social aspects, they're asking questions like what is the pay gap, right? What is the gender pay gap? How many men are getting paid the equal amount as women are getting paid? what is the differently abled pay gap? So what is the average differently abled person's salary, average salary of a normal person? And if there is a gap, what are you doing to mitigate that gap if you're doing anything at all? Similarly, they're also asking questions. What is the person that is the highest paid person within your company, comparing it with the average salary of the person or of any employee within the company, right? So now you know if the rich are making more money, they're just getting richer in the process. You know which company is the reason behind it, right? Which company is the reason for this growing inequality that we read more and more about. And now all of this is being made mandatory by the government, right? By 2022, will be expected from all industries to do so. Just the last slide here. What is the importance of all of this for financial professionals? I've already talked about reporting and compliance. So if it is not mandatory for you right now, you know it is going to be mandatory for you starting 2022. And the thing is, if you're involved in any form of reporting, be it financial reporting as well, you will still need to give non-financial data points like, say, the HSC expenditure, R&D expenditure, CSR expenditure. What are you investing for energy efficiency? What is the money spent on energy efficiency initiatives? So if you're not involved in reporting and compliance already, somewhere down the line, you definitely will be, right? The next section is financing new technologies. So now every time a new technology is introduced and you're involved in any form of budgeting or financial planning for the same, the question that you are now going to be asked is, okay, have you considered ESG parameters as well? Have you considered non-financial risks as well? It could include something as simple as commodity pricing risk. Your feedstock price would change, your raw material price would change. If there's a tax for wastage or for pollution, you will also have you accounted for that tax while you're creating new technologies, right? So finance professionals are at a very good stage of not just supporting businesses in doing so, but also asking the right questions such that there is no future threat to the business in doing so while you're financing the new technology or the new project. There are lots of investors that are asking these questions already. If they, I'm sure a lot of you have already seen sort of the Bloomberg letter that was out, that was shared with the world over. Anyone who will be listed on Bloomberg will have to disclose their ESG specifications. And if a company like Bloomberg is doing so, imagine who else will follow in their footsteps, actually. So investor expectations are increasing in terms of sustainability, and that will definitely seep down tremendously over the next few years. You also have business continuity, right? So if your competitor is meeting all of these sustainability requirements at the same cost and you are not, the consumers will probably prefer the ones that are meeting the same requirements and are not damaging the environment in the process, right? It's not just a threat for competition, it can also be the very reason your company survives the competition or does not survive the competition, right? Risk management is also something I've touched upon, but also there are lots of opportunities for financial professionals. So efficiency equals to money saved. We know this. If your electricity bill is not high, even for us at home on a monthly basis, we've done something right, which means money saved is money earned, right? So that's definitely an opportunity there in terms of any form of efficiency. Transition is also another new opportunity. Every business has to transition the moment they face any form of limitation, right? So if you're in a company, say for example, city could be a limitation, right? You want to expand, say your company is based in Pune and you want to expand to Mumbai. Your limitation is currently a geographic boundary, but the expansion is an opportunity, right? Similarly, that applies to any and all sustainability measures as well. So if there's an energy transition happening away from fossil fuels to hydrogen, that is a new business opportunity. It could be an opportunity for first comers. There's a huge opportunity for first comers. There will also be a huge opportunity for the most cost-effective businesses in this space, right? How you increasing your profit margins for the same competitive cost will be a whole other conversation in these transitions. And of course, on a personal level, I think Pradeep sir also mentioned it in the beginning. Sustainability affects all of us on a personal level. I've touched a little bit about natural disasters, sea level rise is affecting them. Our CM is working on it directly. Even in spite the coalition government, they've come to consensus on the fact that they have to address sea level rise in Mumbai. The rise of diseases, we are living through a pandemic, this goes without saying, irrespective of whether or not you believe the story about bat to human transmission, it is a virus that originated in a non-human species, right? That has moved towards a human species. That's what happens when you live in nature. When you're living in tandem with nature, diseases will be transmitted, right? The moment you start thinking you're living away from nature, things like this will happen and you realize, oh, okay, no, I'm as much part of nature as the other species is. So the rise of diseases is possible as and when you see the animal species evolving and we don't evolve at the same speed. Adaptation to new technologies, like this goes without saying, if you have been to Delhi before the pandemic, you will see that a lot of houses anyway have air purifiers because they know that the air is too polluted to live comfortably in, right? So there are lots of these adaptation techniques that you and I also need to look at for whatever disaster, whatever environmental impact that we would suffer. And as I've mentioned earlier, environmental parameters are very linked with social parameters. There is a study around green spaces directly increasing in low-income houses. This will keep changing. You will have food insecurity in the area. You have like farmer suicides is an issue that happens as a consequence of drought as well, right? Climatic conditions, extreme climate change has happened. So inequality, poverty, and hunger will also increase because of all of these environmental impacts. On that note, I understand there are a couple of questions, but I'm 2 minutes over time. Do we have time to take the question or?
Yes, we can take up. If there are no questions at present.
I think somebody raised their hand though. Not sure.
No, but they have not posted any questions.
Sure. Yes.
We can wait for 1 or 2 minutes more.
Sure. Okay, I'll be around. I can also leave my contact information for anyone who wants to get in touch after and ask questions.
Sure. So it was a really wonderful session. So we got to know many things about the sustainability reporting. So I am sure that every members will be benefited for these sessions. And now I request my colleague Sikandar Yadav to provide a very well-deserved vote of thanks to Ms. Mitika Bajpai.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Hiran. Good morning, members and respected guests. It is a great pleasure and honor to propose vote of thanks to learned speaker. I, on behalf of Borivali Central CP Study Circle, propose vote of thanks to Ms. Mitika Bajpai for presenting topic on sustainability reporting, the way forward. As now the corporate world is moving from single P to triple P, that is from profit to planet, people, and profit. We thank Mitika Madam for sharing her views and knowledge on the subject in a best possible manner by way of beautiful PowerPoint presentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
So we have with us second speaker, CA Heman Sabharwal ji. We have the second topic is on corporate social responsibility. And it's as you know, it's a continuous commitment from the business side for the social and environmental concerns. So I request my colleague Bijal Doshi to briefly introduce second speaker of the day.
Thank you, sir.
Heman Sabharwal. Yeah.
Heman Sabharwal is a chartered accountant and associated member of Institute. Presently, he is partner of PwC LLP, or Certified Information System Auditor, as well as a special invitee for Sustainable Reporting Standards Board of ICAI. He has over 24 years of experience in working with corporates, donor agencies, international non-profit organization, government, etc. He has in-depth knowledge in understanding of CSR requirements and entire journey of CSR program of a company from formulation of the policy to conceptualizing the program to implementation and monitoring the program. He also has extensive experience in sustainability assurance, integrated reporting, business responsibility reporting, and waste management reviews. With this brief introduction, I would like to present the memento to the speaker.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Bijilji, for the introduction. Can I start?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks once again for the introduction and thanks for Borivali CP Study Circle of WIRC for inviting me here to share my views on CSR, its development, compliances, and impact assessment. Very happy to be here and speak on this subject. Very good morning to all the attendees here, the members. And before I start, I think just want to mention that in a way, my session is linked to the previous section just taken by Mitika because when we talk about CSR or social sustainability or community engagement for companies, I think it is a subset of the overall ESG aspects that a company works on. Amongst the ESG pillars, I think out of the social pillar, community engagement is a very important aspect, and it sort of gives a company social license to operate. And I think that's where it fits in the whole scheme of things, the larger scheme of things on ESG. So what I will be covering today would be a quick sort of background on CSR, how it came into being, the rules that are there, what are the amendments that have come in, what, let's say, has been the CSR spend in the last few years, how the scenario is changing given the pandemic. Then also we'll talk about different compliance requirements, especially the recent amendments. And I will also talk about impact assessment and lastly on reporting on CSR. So with that, I think I will start. Could I request someone to present? Yes, please. Thanks. Right. So I think before I start, I also wanted to mention that the recent amendments in CSR rules provide actually extensive opportunities for CAs in practice to engage with their clients on helping implement different aspects brought into play by the amendments. And as I move along, I will touch upon these aspects in detail. I hope the presentation is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So I think before we get into the detailed CSR guidelines, I think the first guidelines on CSR were issued by DP in April 2010. This is the Department of Public Enterprises, which made it mandatory for public sector enterprises to set aside a fixed percentage of profits for CSR activities. Subsequently, DP explored new dimensions of sort of CSR to form in the form of responsible business to be adopted by voluntarily adopted by companies. Then in 2011, the national voluntary guidelines were released. These are guidelines on social, environmental, and economic responsibilities of business. And in a sense, the social responsibilities of business did talk about what the community engagement and CSR activities the company did. Of course, finally, in 2013, the CSR rules came into being on a comply or explain model. And the incorporation of specific provisions in the CSR in the Companies Act in a way was a culmination of efforts of DP to mobilize support of different stakeholders to propagate the concept and philosophy of CSR. And we all know that in 2021, with the recent amendments in January, finally CSR has been moved from a comply or explain to a comply model. And I'm not sure if all of us know here, but India is the first country in the world to impose a statutory obligation on CSR for corporations meeting certain criteria. And this provision sort of makes India the only country that makes both spending and reporting of CSR mandatory. But I think that Companies Act and subsequent amendments have expanded and clarified activities for which the 2% funding can be used. In fact, there is been a concerted effort from the government to expand the activities that have been there in Schedule 7 to basically have to increase the positive impact on the society. I think, okay, can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I think overall eligibility, we all know, but I thought I'll reiterate when CSR becomes applicable for a company, if the net worth is more than 500 crores or turnover is more than 1,000 crores or net profit exceeds 5 crores, basically any of the three qualifying conditions are met, then the requirement of CSR becomes applicable for a company, and the company is mandatorily required to spend 2% of the average net profits of the last three years on CSR activities. So here, I think, yeah, next slide, please. Maybe yeah. So I think on the CSR front, Schedule 7 defines various areas which can be covered as part of the CSR activities of a company, and you can see the bubbles on the left side which talk about the areas, and I can just touch upon a few important ones: eradicating hunger, poverty, malnutrition, education, skill development, livelihood, preservation of art heritage, environment sustainability is a big element, women empowerment, then sort of rural development, rural sports. You can even contribute to certain central government funds, contribution to Prime Minister's National Relief Fund. And the scope recently of the activities under Schedule 7 has been widened during the COVID times to include a large number of activities that are being undertaken under COVID. And I think it's a very positive move because this really helped companies in India sort of contribute towards this fighting this pandemic together with the NGOs on the ground. So some of the activities which have been added are the promotion of healthcare, including preventive healthcare and sanitation and disaster management. Then most spending on COVID-19, whether it is creating health infrastructure for COVID care, establishment of medical oxygen generation and storage plants, oxygen concentrators, ventilators, cylinders, other medical equipment for countering COVID-19, everything is included and allowed. Even a PM CARES fund was set up for companies who wanted to contribute to it so that that money could go for COVID relief. And there have been additions on the with regard to the armed forces, veterans and war widows related contributions as well. So here I think in the Indian context, if you take a closer look at most of these activities, they are in some way or the other linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And just to elaborate a bit on it for those members who may not be knowing or maybe very well versed with UN SDGs, they are a collection of 17 global goals designed to achieve a more sustainable future for all, for everyone on the planet. These 17 goals consist of 169 sort of targets, and India has been a very prominent, has played a very prominent role in the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, where these SDGs were sort of finalized. India sort of currently ranks at 115 out of 162 on the SDG index, which shows that we have, as a country, we have a lot to do to be able to reach the sustainable development goals targets that we have. And this slow progress actually calls for immediate action through a collaboration between government, civil society organizations, corporate, uh, and 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 I think corporates are seen as key drivers of SDGs. You cannot just bank upon the government to do everything for you. So that's the reason I think uh, these days we see that corporates have started taking more interest also on CSR. And I think CSR and SDGs together have a tremendous potential to develop an interconnected model. And as you execute activities towards CSR, you can really see you can and as you try and assess impact of your activities on the ground, you can see how you are in some manner directly indirectly contributing to different SDGs. So I mean, for example, when an organization defines a CSR focus area on, let's say, enhancing livelihoods through skill development training for women, youth, it is contributing to various SDGs such as means to end poverty, zero hunger, providing quality education, promoting gender equality, economic growth. So one program on livelihoods, as I described, could lead to contribution or may touch upon several sort of SDGs. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I thought before we get into the details on CSR, it might be good to give a quick overview on where we stand as a country in terms of CSR expenditure and where we have moved from the time when CSR rules were first introduced. So if you see, firstly, the companies, the number of companies has grown from around 16,000 in FY 14-15 to over 21,000 in 1920. It seemed, I mean, there has been a dip in 1920, probably because of COVID and companies also being sort of feeling the stretch because of the pandemic. But overall expenditure, if you see, despite the companies going down, has increased. And on the expenditure front, from FY 14-15 to 19-20, the expenditure has almost doubled from 10,000 crores to over 21,000 crores. So over the last years, I think the average has been about 18,000 crores, which is a significant amount towards CSR. And if you try and look at please remain on the same slide. Yeah, if you try and look at the graph on the right hand side of the slide, this shows the amount of CSR expenditure by one company. So if you see the 0 to 50 lakhs category, which is on the top, is the category which is most populated. So in the sense that most companies fall under that bracket. And sometimes I think during our discussions with companies feel that can we make a difference if we are just spending 0 to 50 lakhs or 50 lakhs on a project? I think that if as a country we have to achieve our sustainable development goals, then each company, each individual needs to contribute. So even a 50 lakh contribution by a company on a specific project makes a difference, as long as you are trying to really implement in the right spirit and trying to make a difference on the ground. And you would see there would probably be only a handful of companies which are in the range of 50 lakhs to 1 crores, and beyond that, even fewer companies. Next slide, please. So this further sort of shows certain trends in CSR spending. On the left hand side, you can see the thematic area basically in which companies have spent their funds. I think the largest being education, skill development, livelihoods, followed by healthcare, which includes preventive healthcare as well as rural development. So I think these are the areas where most of the money has gone in the last, you can say, about 5 to 6 years. And when we talk about the states on the right hand side, you can see that Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Odisha are the sort of, and Andhra Pradesh are the largest states in terms of the CSR spend. Some of the states, again, just informing the members, some of the states like Gujarat, Punjab have set up their own CSR authority. So Gujarat has a CSR authority, Punjab has a similar council where they try and encourage companies to uh, give funds, and the CSR authority at the government level pools in funds and tries to execute programs in the state depending on the need of the state and the various sort of uh, areas where they need to focus on. So these are also sort of, this is also very interesting uh, a partnership between, examples of partnership between government as well as the corporates, and obviously NGOs, because they would be involved in execution at their end. Next slide, please. So I thought I'll quickly talk about some of the key changes that have come into being as a result of the recent amendments in early 2021. I just spoke about the eligibility of the companies for CSR. There has been no change on that. Earlier, there was no requirement of a CFO certification, but now that is mandatory, so that each CFO of the company has to certify that the amounts disbursed have been utilized for the purposes. And then there were no consequences for not spending or transfer of funds, which have now been instituted. If you see, if you don't spend the money in accordance with the Schedule 7 activities, or there is an unspent CSR account, and you were not able to finally spend money, then there could be penalties twice the amount for the company, and even penalties for the officer in default. And on the capital asset side, there were earlier no requirements, but now the requirements are that if you are creating any assets or acquiring assets for any of the CSR programs, then certain entities can only hold those assets. It can be Section 8 company, registered public trust, society, or even the beneficiaries for whom the CSR programs have been defined. And these could be self-help groups, collectives, entities, or a public authority. And from a transition perspective, any asset which is held or created and is not transferred within 180 days, which is extendable by 90 days, then that's also an issue. So you can see, maybe I'll talk about certain other amendments also, and so you will see that how or in what direction the regulators are progressing, and so basically they are moving. I think we have moved from a comply or explain to comply model, but more than compliance, I think the focus is that the programs that are being executed by corporates should make a real difference on the ground, and it should not be done just for the sake of it. And therefore, certain other amendments have been brought in, which I'll talk about more in detail later, like impact assessments, like disbursements. Earlier, companies, what they used to do was just disburse funds and say, okay, we have executed our CSR programs, but now that is not the case. The MCA wants companies to really track the money till it's finally spent by the implementing agencies. So I think I think there is a major shift in the way the regulation is now versus what it was earlier. Next slide, please. So I thought I'll also touch upon the role of board and CSR committee as amended in the recent rules. So you can see that the role of the board and both have been sort of expanded or enhanced in the recent amendments, and primarily from the rationale or reason that the board and the CSR committee, and again you see the amendment of CFO certification. These are all being brought in from the perspective that corporates need to take ownership of the programs that they execute and really see if they are making a difference, and not just to do programs for the sake of it, or just disburse money to NGOs. So if you see the role of board, it is one to approve the CSR policy, ensure that the contents of the policy as well as other requirements under the rules are disclosed on the company's website, ensure that activities included in the CSR policy are properly undertaken. So they should be monitoring that through the CSR committee. Again, ensure that whatever minimum amount is to be spent is spent every financial year. And be, as the board of the company, be satisfied the funds have been utilized for the purposes for which it was set up. And again, track all these so that basically if the company fails to spend the 2%, the board in its report has to specify the reasons for not spending, and again ensure that the funds are transferred to an unspent CSR account. On the corporate social, the CSR committee side, their role is next to the board, and more on the board overview as more of like a governance and oversight. CSR committee is the next level, slightly getting into bit of formulation of policy implementation. So they need to formulate the CSR policy for the board, recommend the amount of expenditure to be incurred on different CSR activities, monitor from time to time, have an annual action in place, which will include items mentioned in the CSR policy, and sort of have ensured that other functions assigned by the board to the committee are carried out. Next slide, please. Coming to administrative overheads, I'm sure members would have seen that this is a very important topic and a topic of discussion very often when you talk about CSR spend, as to how the administrative overheads should be classified, what falls under it, what doesn't fall under it. And so here, I think over the years, basis practice, as well as I think several FAQs issued by MCA, I think now it's quite well established as to what forms comes under overheads and what doesn't. So any expenses incurred by the company on general management and administration of CSR functions fall under administration overheads. It does not include expenses which are directly incurred on particular CSR projects or programs, which means if it is about designing of a program, actual implementation, monitoring or evaluation, that will not be under administrative overhead. That will be actual program expenditure. And the requirement under Rule 7 is that the board shall ensure that administrative overheads shall not exceed 5% of the total CSR expenditure. Again, here one needs to understand what is the rationale for limiting or putting a cap on the percentage. That is to ensure that companies do not set up very large structures just to manage programs, but the most money should go into actual projects and for the benefit of the society at large. And just few examples which come out of the FAQs of the MCA. So, and employee costs again has been a issue of discussion, whether it falls under administrative overheads or not. So there it has been clarified that employee costs, utilities, office supplies, legal expenses, etc., form part of overheads. So, for example, salary and training for employees working on a CSR division of a company, stationery, traveling expenses, etc., would be administrative overheads. But salary of school teachers or other staff for an education related program would be program expenditure and not overheads, because that is hardcore money spent on the program. Again, a question has been coming, or companies have been asking the question whether, so one is administrative expenses of the company. Then when NGOs or implementing agencies propose their projects to the companies, there also bit of administrative expenditure is included. So for example, an NGO proposes an education project to a company, and as it's a project for, let's say, 1 lakh rupees, and 5,000 rupees have been included as administrative overheads for the NGO. So it has been clarified that that amount of administrative expenditure which is spent by the implementing agencies is not cannot be included under administrative overhead, because that is meant for the company only. Next slide, please. Again, as a result of the new amendments, another topic for discussion has been the unspent amount, and how do you handle it in versus ongoing projects as well as non-ongoing projects. And I'll touch upon both aspects in the next few slides. So the second provision to section 135 says that if a company fails to spend entire CSR obligation and the unspent amount does not relate to ongoing project, then the unspent amount is to be transferred to Schedule 7 fund within a period of 6 years of the expiry of the financial year. So that means that if you have a project which is not an ongoing project, so which means it is not a multi-year project, this is a one-time or a one-year project, then if there is any unspent amount at the end of the project, then that has to be transferred to fund specified under Schedule 7. So companies are not permitted to spend the unspent CSR amount other than ongoing projects, which I will talk about separately. And even during the intervening period of 6 months till the amount is transferred, you cannot use that money. And for any amount of CSR which has been disclosed, any unspent amount which has been disclosed in the director's report prior to the amendment, that is sort of deemed as sufficient compliance, because this amendment has recently come. So again, questions have been coming from companies whether if we have unspent amount prior to the amendment, what should we do with it? So it MCA has clarified that it is up to the company. I mean, basically, company can decide to in whatever manner they deem fit, because amendment came later, so they can use the unspent amount or deposit. But after the amendment, you cannot use it. You have to deposit. And also, it has been clarified that you may continue to follow the same practices in respect of projects prior to the amendment. Next slide, please. So I've tried to here present a decision tree or a decision chart to try and help members think through as to what would happen if you have unspent, or companies, what would happen for companies if there are unspent CSR funds. So I'll start from the left side. So if the company has unspent CSR funds, and the answer to that question is yes, then the second question is whether the unspent amount is for an ongoing project or not. So if it is not for an ongoing project, then within 6 months, as I mentioned in the previous slide, within 6 months of the financial year, the amount has to be transferred to funds notified under Schedule 7. And that closes the loop. Then if the unspent amount is for an ongoing project, then uh, 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 the unspent amount is to be transferred to a special account to be opened by the company, which will be called the unspent CSR account, where within 30 days of the end of the financial year, that the amount should be transferred and it should be spent within 3 years of the transfer. So if it is an ongoing project, you can transfer to a specific account to be opened by the company and spend within 3 years. But if it is a non-ongoing project or a one-time project, not a multi-year project, you have to necessarily transfer the funds to funds notified under Schedule 7. And so again, the question comes that if the money is not spent within 3 years for ongoing projects, then if not, then again the money within 30 days has to be transferred to funds notified under Schedule 7. And if it is spent, then obviously you can go and report in the CSR report. And again, starting from beginning, if there is no unspent amount, then obviously whatever money has been spent, you can report in your annual CSR report. And even unspent amount which has been transferred needs to be reported in the CSR report. So you can see that, sorry, just give me 1 second, please. Yeah, so so this is a chart to help sort of companies and think through in terms of how the unspent funds have to be or can be handled. Next slide, please. Sorry, just yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. So on ongoing projects, here again, it has been clarified that ongoing projects are multi-year projects undertaken by a company in fulfillment of the CSR obligation. The maximum time duration allowed for ongoing projects is 4 years. So that is first year of commencement and 3 years. So it's 1 + 3 years. Also, projects that were initially not approved as multi-year but are later extended beyond 1 year by the board on reasonable justification would also fall under the definition of ongoing projects. And section 135 broadly says that any, as I said earlier, any unspent amount on ongoing projects would need to be transferred to the unspent account, 3 years for spending, not spent, then spent, transfer to the scheduled funds. And this amendment will be applicable for all ongoing projects, including projects commenced in FY 2021, and for March 21, companies had to determine that each project that they had was whether an ongoing project or a non-ongoing project, and basis that they had to determine how much funds were to be transferred at the end of FY 21. And also it has been clarified by MCA that you can, if you have multiple ongoing projects, you can open one and spend account in which you can transfer the funds, and you don't necessarily need to open a separate unspent account for each sort of ongoing project. And as I mentioned earlier, there has been a clarification that mere disbursal of funds for project implementation to an implementing partner does not amount to spending. It has to be ultimately spent by the implementing agency. Next slide, please. Again, on the types of implementing agencies, the recent amendments have talked about the different types of implementing agencies that can be there for implementation. One is established by the company, implementing agency established by the company, which means it could be a foundation of a company, can be a Section 8 company, public trust, society, but has to be registered under 12A and 80G. Then they could be established by the government. And the example of Gujarat CSR Authority, Punjab CSR Authority that I took earlier would fall under this second bucket. And the third category is established under statute. Here, I think uh, um, academic institutions which are set up as under acts of parliament or state legislature, like universities and technical institutions, those fall under this third bucket. And lastly, I think NGOs, we all know, can be implementing agencies, can be a Section 8 company, again registered public trust or society, but needs to be registered under 12A, 80G, as well as have a track record of 3 years, which means it has to be in existence and executing programs for at least 3 years. And all implementing agencies are required to get themselves registered with the central government by filing a e-CSR form with ROC with effect from April 1, 2021. And I think the requirement of registration of 12A and 80G is effective from 22nd January when the amendments came in. And MCA, I mean, basically MCA opened it up from April 1, 2021 for people to file forms. So for existing projects, you don't need to necessarily, you don't need to file the CSR1 form, but any projects started after 1st April 2021, you need to, the implementing agency needs to file the CSR1 form. Next slide, please. Yeah, so then I think one of the topics that I was requested to speak on is impact assessment, impact analysis. And so I will now be talking about that. And I think it has, I mean, as I was saying, you can see the direction in which the regulation is heading. Now, impact assessment above a particular threshold has been made mandatory for companies, which means regulators are pushing companies to really look at if their programs are making an impact on the ground. So before I thought, before I thought I'll get into details on what the compliances or regulations are, I would quickly talk about what an impact assessment means for the benefit of the audience here. An impact assessment basically aims to understand and to what extent how an intervention sort of corrects the problem it was intended to address. And impact assessment sort of focuses effects on different interventions and can be done through various methodologies and may cover a wide range of issues. So, and it may, I mean, when you do an impact assessment for, let's say, a livelihood program being executed by a company through an implementing agency, you would look at appropriateness of the intervention design, whether, I mean, it was designed appropriately to address the issue on the ground, the cost and the efficiency of the intervention, its unintended effects. So number of times when you design an intervention or a program from a CSR angle, you do target what would be the impact or the effects or the outputs of the program. But sometimes there are unintended effects also. So for example, if there is a livelihood program designed for the women, there would be some unintended effects in terms of if the program works well, then there could be positive impact on the overall income of the family, the growth of the family, the health of the family, because if the women in the family uh, are generating more livelihood, then it would have that impact. So sometimes you design a program with some objective in mind, but there are unintended effects or benefits as well. Sorry, I mean, the presentation has become blurred. Is it just for me or everyone?
Yes, I think I'm also not able to see it properly. Sikandar.
I'll continue in the meantime, maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
So I mean, it's the words are blurred. I can't
yeah,
read them.
internet
Yeah,
bandwidth. There's
Is
a
it for me
bandwidth
only
issue.
or for everyone?
It's for everyone.
Okay. No worries. I'll probably continue in the interest of time. So I think
I'll stop my video. There is a bandwidth.
Yeah.
Now I think it is.
or maybe you can just present again. I think it might.
Uh,
Yeah, as someone suggested, just reload again.
But it's coming now, sir.
No, you just share screen band karo, then again you restart.
Stop presenting and now present again.
Now it's visible, sir.
Not coming.
No, not
Still
yet.
working.
Same issue or?
You can't see the
No.
screen as yet.
So can you try from your side, because
Yes.
maybe there is a
Just a moment.
bandwidth issue from Heman, sir.
I will try.
Now, is the screen visible?
Yes. Yes,
I will
Pradeep.
just pull the slide down. Just help
Yes,
me with the
yes, no
exact
problem.
slide number.
It is slide number 14.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, so I was just talking about impact assessment. So, normally an impact assessment study should be based on a log frame approach, which sort of it helps in understanding the impact of the projects that an organization is executing. It basically helps in understanding the entire cycle of the project, and I'll come to it more in detail on the next slide. I think someone has raised a hand. Should we?
No, that's fine, sir. We only take questions through Q&A box. Can you see the slides, sir, now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, you can
So,
continue.
okay. So I mean, this is basically the approach for impact assessment is based on the theory of change, which is basically, I mean, if we see there are three pillars: program design, goals and objectives, and program targets. And under them, there are five sort of activities. One is inputs. So I've here tried to take again an example of illustrative example of a livelihood project. So there are five key activities in a theory of change or log frame approach: inputs, processes, outputs, outcomes, and impact. So if we take an example of a livelihood project, inputs would mean what is the project strategy, who will be the personnel working, what will be the amount of funds going into the project, the training required, the processes would mean designing of the project, the service delivery, um, actual service delivery, what is the enabling environment, partnership with local government or other organizations. Outputs would be, and here I think it is important to understand the difference between output, outcomes, and impact. So output would be the numbers, the output achieved as a result of the program. So for example, if the project, as a part of the project, X number of trainings were to be conducted, X placements completed, uh, livelihood options created, how many women empowered. So these would be output indicators for a project. But when we talk about the outcomes, then it is more, you can say, qualitative, right? In terms of enhanced employability of the people who are part of the program. And when we talk about the impact, it's the socio-economic community welfare. I mean, what is the real impact in terms of, let's say, uh, increase in earnings of people, impact on their well-being, health. So all those things linked to the to the program. And from inputs to outcomes, this part forms part of the monitoring of the project. And from processes to impact, these are the impact evaluation part. And of course, data is very important, because to be able to really impact, to be able to really track the outputs and the impact of a program, you need to have proper data gathering processes, and you need to set up, as part of your log frame, uh, specific indicators on which you would track data. Then only you'll be able to see the real outputs and impact at the end of the program. Next slide, please. So coming to the requirement as part of the recent amendments, the Rule 8 says that any company with CSR obligation of 10 crore or more for 3 preceding financial years would be required to hire an independent agency to conduct impact assessment of all their projects with an outlay of 1 crore or more. So here there is a threshold. So above this threshold, companies need to get impact assessments done. And while I mean, I can share with you that a lot of companies used to get impact assessment done earlier as well. But now, of course, with the mandate, I'm sure the number of impact assessments would grow up. And here again, I would say there is an opportunity for our members here to build capabilities on this area, to be able to help their clients. I think here again, impact assessments is quite focused on the program aspects, and very little financial aspects are there. So I think the firms would need to build up social expertise as well to be able to work in this area. So again, as part of the rules as well as FAQs, it has been clarified that expenditure input on impact assessment is over and above the 5% threshold that has been specified for administrative overheads. And companies can spend a maximum of 5% of total CSR expenditure or 50 lakh rupees, whichever is lower, which can be incurred separately for the impact assessment. And if 2 or more companies are working jointly on a project, and if one company gets the impact assessment done for the entire project, then that is sufficient sort of compliance, and both companies can use that impact assessment report. And one of the other important things is that impact assessment report has to be placed before the board and has to be annexed to the report on CSR. Now, this is a very critical and new requirement, and you can visualize from the company's perspective that it is a big change, because one is getting an impact assessment done. Second is publishing that report on your as part of your CSR report. And here uh, as part of the FAQs, it has been clarified that as part of your CSR report, you can publish uh, uh, an exact summary and give a link to the full report, which again means it is a public report. So what an independent agency has to be hired for doing the impact assessment. It cannot be done by the company. So imagine the if a company gets an impact assessment done and the results are negative, it will have to be put by the company either ways on the website and for the public at large to see that what's happening on the program. So from the, let's say, perspective of stakeholders such as communities, they can see on in terms of the public information as to whether the impacts, the programs have been properly executed or not. Next slide, please. So again, as part of FAQs, it has been clarified that companies are required to take impact assessments of CSR projects completed on or after the amendment date, because so if your project ended before that, then it is not mandatory. But if your project ends, let's say in end January, then you have to get the impact assessment done. And I think one has to understand, while the regulation is there, but I think the broader uh, a reason for bringing in this amendment is that sort of impact assessments help funders, grant makers, companies to really understand and evaluate the impact of those investments, interventions on the society. And as I said earlier, the intention of the rules is to encourage companies to to take considered decisions for deploying CSR funds and not just put funds into any project, because at the end of the day, this impact assessment would come into the picture, and it also sort of serves as a feedback for the company to, let's say, if it's to modify the interventions going forward as they look at new interventions. Next slide, please. Some of the other key amendments I thought I'll quickly mention. Um, First one is the activities which do not fall under the purview of 135. These are activities undertaken in the normal course of business, activities undertaken outside India, unless it is for the benefit of sports persons who are participating in some international, national or state level competitions, sponsorship which may be just targeted at marketing, uh, anything which is benefiting, any programs which are benefiting the employees will not be part of CSR, because the intention of the law is that it should benefit the society at large. Anything to do with fulfilling statutory obligations or contribution to a political party also do not form part of the CSR spend. And I think the new CSR policy, I mean, there is a new definition of CSR policy, and I mean, it's on your screen, so I will not read through it. But I think key thing to note is that there should be an action plan. So there should be a list of approved projects, how they will be executed, modalities of utilization of funds, implementation schedules, monitoring mechanisms. So all these things have to be factored in. And also there were lots of questions from companies on, if you have, let's say, a company has uh, has to spend 2 crores as per the section 135 on CSR, and it ends up spending 2 crore 25 lakhs, then can the 25 lakhs be offset against future years when there is the spend is lower? And again, here it has been clarified that that you can offset any extra spend for the next 3 years, and the board has to pass a resolution to that effect. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think I thought I'll quickly touch upon the formats that have to be filled as part of the board report. Before that, I would just say that recently the MCA has issued FAQs which are very specific and answer some of the very relevant questions which were there in the mind of companies and members in relation to the recent amendments. So I would encourage everyone to read those FAQs, and I think that would probably address most of your questions on the recent amendments. So these are, I mean, so in terms of the annual report format of the CSR report to be included in the board report, there are two annexures. One which is for the year commenced prior to 1 April of 2020. So for the basically the year prior to the amendment. Next slide, please. And the second one is in relation to the years starting 2021, which is for the year when the amendments have been brought in. And if you, I mean, I know the text is small, you may not be able to read everything, but again here, most aspects that I just spoke about in terms of amendments, whether it is amount of spend, what kind of projects, whether it ongoing projects or not, assets created under the program, all those things, sorry, next slide. All those things have been brought into the form. So the reporting ambit has also been expanded a lot. So you would see, and it also requests for information relating to some of the previous years, because unspent amount has to be tracked. So all those, that information is sort of been enhanced in the form, which will now be used going forward. Yeah, you can see the form is pretty long as compared to the previous sort of form. I think broadly that's all from my side on the presentation. I think before I end, I would like to sort of summarize by saying that CSR provisions amendments have a far-reaching impact on the way CSR has been implemented by companies till now. There is an overall push to enhance not only the efforts, but also, I think, towards CSR, but also continuously evaluate the impact on the ground. While CSR is a compliance requirement, I believe it should be used by companies as an opportunity to make a difference to the society at large and help the needy. And coming to, again, as I said a few times during my presentation, opportunities for our members in practice. Again, I would say that every change that comes, there is an opportunity for members to, as long as we continuously enhance our knowledge base, enhance our expertise, I think we should be able to do a lot in CSR domain, whether it is to advise corporates on different, I mean, we can advise corporates on different aspects of CSR, whether what kind of CSR policy they should have, how they should set up their programs, how assessment of the implementing agencies needs to be done, monitoring of programs on the ground, audits, impact assessments. So there is a lot that one can do as long as we stay updated on what's happening on this. So I think with that, I will end my session and back to the members of the study circle. Yes.
So there is one question. So I just read out.
Right.
Can company claim deduction under Section 80G for the contribution made in the PM National Relief Fund under CSR?
So it has been clarified by the, if I remember correctly, clarified by the MCA that any amount that is spent by the companies on CSR cannot be claimed under income tax. It is not sort of part of business expenditure, so it cannot be claimed.
So there are no more questions. So it's wonderful session, sir. It's very informative, and I'm sure that it's give a very detailed insight to our members on the CSR provisions, compliances, and the impact of that CSR. So I request my colleague Sikandar Yadav to give you a very well-deserved hearty vote of thanks.
Thank you, Hiran. It is a great pleasure and honor to propose vote of thanks to the learned speaker. I, on behalf of Borivali Central CP Study Circle, propose vote of thanks to the learned speaker, CA Heman Sabharwal, sir. Sir has presented a topic by way of pictures chart, tables in PPT for better understanding. We hope it was very useful for all the present members. Thank you, sir, for sharing your views and knowledge. Now I request all the present members for a loud virtual applause. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we end this today's meeting. Thank you very much for all to joining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.